scarf at the door. Someone gave me this lovely scarf at an event in England recently. But I hope you're all keeping well. And the truthers will be saying, "Oh, it's a monstonic scarf. It's these Freemasons. I'm a rabbi, you know." Hey, yeah. Anyway, I hope you're all keeping well. It's funny, like talking about that. There was I was talking about the truthers yesterday and how they're a liability for any movement they have around, or anybody, even a public person to have around, and because they'll eventually turn on you because they don't do the inner work, because they're all paranoid from smoking weed or that kind of thing, and or they're mentally ill. And then in the comments of the video yesterday, one perfectly manifests, and he calls me something from wise man to gimp, or something like that. You know, immediately straight in with the personal insults, straight in with the hatred. They go from zero, they go from A to Z and skip all the letters in the alphabet in between, completely unable to adapt to nuanced thinking, and completely unable to sit back and reference things. It's just immediately they explode in hatred immediately, and then that hatred then becomes vindictive, and they go on smear campaigns. They're all the same. They're extremely dangerous people to have around any movement, or any even you as an individual. Don't court them, and because they think they represent some kind of majority interest. They're not. They're just like they're social outcasts, filled with resentments and vindictiveness, and they don't do the work inside. So they blame everything on exterior things, and then they apply a truth guru. And if the guru doesn't work out for them, rather than saying, "I shouldn't have really followed that," they attack them. They don't look at themselves and say, what is it about me that has me falling for these same things over and over again? But that's life, you know. That's the hero's journey for everyone. But I hope you're all keeping well, and that kind of thing. And I came across a photo, it was a funny meme yesterday, and it said, "How much of a conspiracy theorist are you?" And it said, "This much." And it was a picture of Mother Teresa next to Anthony Fauci. And they are identical. Identical. And then I was laughing my head off about it because it was a really funny meme. And then I started thinking, gosh, maybe there's something deeper to this, darker and a bit more esoteric going on here. You know the way people start to look like their pets, or their pets start to look like the people, or people who live together for many years, like a married couple, they start to look like each other? Well, that's epigenetics. And what epigenetics does, it's a part of the genetic makeup that isn't prompted by an external force, albeit, you know, disease, that kind of medications, that kind of thing. It's totally internalized, self-generated, and the sequencing is done inside them. So that's why they start physically looking like the person, or the pet starts looking like the owner. It's the bonding becomes so deep that the epigenetic part of their makeup starts to actually mimic the other person, and they often find that it will suffer from the same illnesses. Like a person has a pet who looks like their owner, you will find that whatever the pet dies of, the owner probably dies of it as well, because it picked up the illness in an early stage through the epigenetics. Fascinating stuff. It still hasn't been properly studied yet. In fact, epigenetics wasn't even accepted until fairly recently. They wouldn't believe there was such a thing, except that eventually some Nobel Prize-winning scientists actually proved it did exist. They believed that all genetic changes could only be triggered by evolutionary or external things, like altering the gene, you know, the genome project, and things like medications and so on, or through, say, something like an industrial accident. Fascinating stuff. But anyway, what if an entity possessed individuals? Now remember, the entity can possess numerous individuals at the same time. You don't have to possess one at a time, numerous ones at a time. And what if this entity had a specific look that mirrored that made the people that it possess, look like what they are, what it is. The way as you age, you tend to get more ethnic looking. I find that, well, I've noticed that as well, that you get more looking, the physical traits associated with ethnicity. Say you come from an ethnic group that has darker skin, or a larger nose, or the eyes closer together, wider apart, or high forebrow, this kind of thing. That as they age, those features become more and more intensified. You know, I've noticed that, and so you tend to look more Irish when you age, if you're Irish, that kind of thing. And in terms of the actual stereotype of how you should look, or the general look, like when I was younger, I was much darker. I looked almost Italian or something like that, or Portuguese or Spanish. And as I've aged, I've gotten more Irish looking. I was very dark when I was younger, and so that's because I'm kind of a mixed ethnicity anyway myself, and that's not uncommon. So what if they age the entity that's been inside them all their lives? They start to resemble it. Because look at the thumbnail of this video. They are the spit of each other. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And what if that was what the entity inside them looks like? Not saying it is. Food for thought. Now, those of you who still think Mother Teresa was a living saint, well, that all was blown out of water in the late 90s by Christopher Hitchens and people like that, and other people who investigated her charity. Her charity turned out to be a money laundering, making scam, and it had collected literally billions over the decades, and that money was raised that on the precept that it was to create hospitals and other medical facilities for the poor and the destitute of Calcutta in India. And it never happened. Even up until the day she died, the hospital was a disgusting place. It was basically sheds that that someone with AIDS, some poor fucker with AIDS or cancer, would show up, and they didn't get medical care. She gave them a pair of rosary beads and gave them a blanket and told them to die in the corner and ask Jesus for forgiveness for being a Hindu or a Muslim. That's literally what went on in her place in Calcutta. It was pure evil, pure evil. And the money has never been accounted for. And we're talking astronomical sums of money that went into Mother Teresa's charity in Calcutta. And then people say, oh, she was a living saint and all this stuff. And I remember there was years ago, she was interviewed on Irish TV by a very good television presenter we used to have here called Gay Byrne. And Gay Byrne was interviewing her. He was a devout Catholic, but he never brought his religion into the TV shows or anything. I remember he interviewed David Icke, and he was actually quite a hell of a lot more respectful to David Icke than what Wogan was, and it happened a bit like the week before or something. And so he never pushed his religion on anyone. Although he was one of these fellows who went to mass every day. But that's a proper religious person to me. It's someone who's devout, and don't push it on someone. But anyway, he's interviewing her, and he said that he had a strange experience where, as he was talking to her and looking into her eyes, he felt he was transported off to a different reality. He said, I felt like I wasn't in control of myself anymore. And he said, oh, it's because she was so spiritual, I picked up on it. And I was like, no, maybe you were glamoured. Maybe that was the entity inside her had bewitched you. This kind of thing and was bewitching you. And that was like, well, when you find out what she was really like, there you go. So, like, what do they both have in common? They both are angels of suffering and death. In the actual demonic sense, that they feed upon the dead and dying. They manifest at the point of death. And they seem to be both of. I mean, if even 10% of what this documentary and film about him coming up is true, I mean, Fauci makes Mengele look like I don't know, you know, Grover from Sesame Street. I mean, this is like what he's like. And it's all about and as the Rona was going full force and everything, you could see that he was getting charged by the numbers of the case numbers and all this stuff. And then you look at the two of them, and they look the same, identical, and you do wonder if the same entity was inside them both, uh, feeding off them. And the same kind of people who would like have statues of Fauci, like, little figurines of Fauci, and they'd show them off, and those videos really do exist, I swear, during the early days of the Rona, are the same people in the previous generation who would have went, Mother Teresa's a living saint, a living saint. Oh, she's a living saint, this kind of thing. And so there's food for thought. There's food for thought. I'm not aware. There's just passages in the Bible where they say things like, when you're falling from grace, and I'm not a Bible head, I'm just saying things that cross-cultural things. And if they've fallen from grace, their left hand withers, their eye withers, this kind of thing, and they develop a certain look. Well, it seems to be the same with these types. I mean, reading about the Pendle witches, half the reason that you could be done for witchcraft in olden times was based on how you looked. If you were pretty and attractive, you had it, or you were well presented. Once the evidence wasn't too harsh, you had a much better chance of being acquitted than going to the gallows. Interesting, eh? And there was two things there was 2 out of 3 that could get you hanged if you were, or burnt if you were a witch. 1, you were a Catholic. 2, you were involved in witchcraft. And 3, you were an ugly hag or an ugly man. And that was usually enough. So if you had all 3, like they did in the Pendle witches, they were Catholic, they were ugly, and they were involved in witchcraft. That was enough to get you done. So, interesting, isn't it? So, speaking of that part of England, I was listening to the greatest. You're looking for musical inspiration. This album here is still. It came out in '83, I think. That's when I got it. It's still the greatest debut album ever made. Scripted the Bridge by the Chameleons. When the album came out back in the day, I remember coming home and putting the LP on the record player, and within 4 songs in, I was like, if I want to be in a band that sounds like these guys, although it sounds a lot like a lot of the bands that were around at the time, the vocals sound a bit like Julian Cope when he was in the Teardrop Explodes. The big mishmash guitar sound, it's all in here. You hear Echo and the Bunnymen from like the Crocodiles period. You hear U2's the first 2 albums, October and Boy. You hear, especially in the drumming, you hear the guitar playing very similar to Susie and the Banshees, and The Cure. And so if you like that sort of early, If I Die, I Die by the Virgin Prunes has a kind of similar vibe. I think of like songs like from New Order, like New Dawn Fades, that kind of thing, right? So they had all that. They had it all. They sounded fantastic, but they never went anywhere really big. I mean, I don't understand why they couldn't have been as big as like the Cure, or or even Echo and the Bunnymen or Susie and the Banshees. It could have been as big as them. I don't know what. Maybe the album came out a little bit too late. When this album came out, we'd already had like Boy in October by U2, If I Die, I Die by the Virgin Prunes. We had all the albums, on by the Fall. All those albums, they had New Order had come and gone. Not New Order, Joy Division, sorry, had come and gone. We had a Cure Post Pornography. Susie and the Banshees join hands in Kaleidoscope, and Hyena I think was already out before this, and Hyena sounds much more modern than this. But this album still is the greatest. When I took it home, that artwork, right? I think you see it there on the LP. I've never seen artwork. It didn't have this band around it. This is just the 25th anniversary CD, but it's just this part. And in the LP, I've never had an album that sounded so much like the artwork on the cover. They were from the Manchester, Rochdale, north of England, industrial mill town vibe. This has this in spades. And that melancholy that you get in that part of England. There's kind of an element of sadness. This is Pendle Witch country again as well. I'm not far from it. I'm going to have a very interesting guest on BR313 who's going to talk about the psychogeography and the legends of this part of England. And which you'll enjoy very much. But it's got that in spades. I mean, you listen to songs like Second Skin, Don't Fall, or Less Than Human, or Up the Down Escalator on this. Every song on this is absolutely fantastic. But none of them are singles. And that probably was why, like the likes of WLIR, I'm starting to sound like Patrick Bateman in American Psycho. Hi, this is the Chameleons, their debut album. While at the time, bands like Susie and the Banshees and The Cure had already broken through with the likes of Kaleidoscope and Pornography, it was still before the halcyon days of the power rock of Susie and of The Cult's Love and First and Last and Always by the Sisters of Mercy. In that gap was the Chameleons, But yeah, so highly recommended album. It's instantly nostalgic. It's like if you could get nostalgia and melancholy and put it in a bottle, it would be Script of the Bridge by the Chameleons. To this day, even better than Pearl Jam's 10, to this day, as good as that was, the greatest debut album of any band anywhere in the world. And it sounds as fresh today as it always did. I think there's lots of reasons bands don't make the big time, big time, is things like they don't have the right management, or there's a lot of agency, the record company doesn't give a fuck. There's lots of things go wrong, publicists get killed in car accidents, all kinds of things. That's what happened. This the Virgin Prunes Ruth Polsky got killed crossing the street outside the Limelight in New York. She was hit by a car, and this kind of thing. And but I don't really know the reason they didn't make the big time, but they certainly have gone into legend. So if you want to get an album that really, I mean, the sound. If you like the sound of heavy guitars that are full of like light and shadow playing off each other, Julian Cope sort of like Teardrop Explode type vocals, although they weren't copying anyone. They sound completely. It's the weirdest thing. They sound typical of the time, typical of the place, but they're still their own band. They were very much part of the zeitgeist. Maybe they arrived a little bit too late. I think this is probably 2 or 3 years after Echo and the Bunnymen's Crocodiles. Now, Crocodiles was another fantastic debut album, and that was another one that was a huge influence on me. I mean, that I was talking to someone last week about it, and I was saying that when I first put on Crocodiles, I was like, Jesus, this is fantastic. When Stars Are Stars, that song, the song Echo and the Bunnymen, Stars Are Stars, that part where Ian McCulloch goes, I catched a falling star, it cut my hand to pieces. And that voice that Ian McCulloch has, I knew that Echo and the Bunnymen were going to be huge stars. They just had that star quality. They didn't, but they still should have been huge for a different reason. In the same way, I mean, lots of bands, from the Velvet Underground to, I'm just trying to think more, like Air, and all the bands, they weren't necessarily singles bands. Dead Can Dance, classic example, but they went on to become very successful. So Script of the. If anyone ever asks you what did Thomas Sheridan say was the best debut album of any band ever, Script of the Bridge by the Chameleons. How I got from a demon inside famous people to an album made by a band in the north of England back in the early 1980s, I don't know. But that's how my brain works. And it's all kind of glued together with a mortar of like Friedrich Nietzsche, Carl Jung, and so on. I am what I am. So, yeah, you'd look after yourselves, okay? Take care of yourselves. And there's a lot of madness on the roads. So, enjoy your lives. Have a good time. And as long as I'm here, witches, no, we're not going to lose anyone on my watch. So, sanguine gnosis. And look after yourselves. Love yourself to bits. Less than human, I surmise.